Hello, we're back again with another prop making video tutorial. Last week we made Blade's sword, this week we're making his gun. There's a free template available for this, so make sure you stay tuned at the end of the video to find out where to find that. Okay, let's get cracking. So these are the templates. It's only 2 pages, so nothing too complicated here. These are meant to be printed on A4 paper, and there's a scale in the top right corner so you can make sure that it's going to be printed out the right size. So once you've got these, cut all the pieces out. Like I say, there's not many and they're pretty straightforward templates. And then these 2 parts here are going to need to be stuck together, and that's your basic shape of your gun. Once you've got your template, fold in all of the little accessory pieces like the trigger and the charging handle, that sort of thing, the magazine, because we're going to want to trace around this and only get the basic shape of the gun. I've just cut off the bit on the bottom there because that's a thinner part than the rest of the gun, and then folding in the rest of those pieces that we're not going to want on the main template. This is then pinned onto a piece of 10mm thick EVA foam. This is the floor mat, and I'm tracing around this with a knife rather than a Sharpie so it doesn't leave any Sharpie lines that are going to show through the paint. Make sure you flip at least one of these so that way you've got a nice smooth side of your foam for both sides of the gun. You're going to need 3 thicknesses of 10mm foam for the actual body of the gun itself. Once you've traced around all your pieces, cut them out with a very sharp knife. All of these are straight cuts and none of them are beveled, so it's nice and simple. This long trigger guard bit we'll deal with later. These are the parts of the main body of the gun. I'm going to rough up the textured side with a rasp file to help the glue stick better. And I'm also going to cut off all of the grips. I'm also cutting out the little empty shell casing ejection port on the side there. Then I'm going to put a bit of glue back in that hole and then take that bit I've cut out and set it back in there slightly recessed. Once that glue is completely set, I'll take a very sharp knife and trim that from the back so it's flush with the rest of the foam. These are the 3 sections of the grip. Going to glue all of those together, making sure that you've got a smooth piece on either side of the finished grip. And do exactly the same thing with the main body of the gun and the bit that goes underneath the trigger. The bit between the trigger and the main body is just a rectangle I cut to size, and then I trim that down so it's the right thickness. And that will just go between the 2. But before we do that, as you can see, it's multiple layers of foam that's going to need to be made look a little bit more pleasing to the eye. So I'm using some 2mm thick craft foam and just going around the whole of the outside edge. You can see here that I've used 4 layers thick for the main body of the gun, which was too thick, and in the end ended up removing 1 layer, making it only 3 layers thick. I'm rounding off the edges of the grip now. Using a knife like this will leave a very jagged edge, so you can fix this by using a combination of a rasp file and some sandpaper. That will still leave some little fuzzy furry bits behind and some texture you might not want. So I find an easier way to deal with this, rather than getting a Dremel out or something and making a crap ton of dust, is to use a heat gun. And once you've heated the foam, use something metal and smooth, and in this case I use a small teaspoon to just rub that down and get that a bit smoother. Now the sides of the grip where you've beveled the edges, you can't just put a big thick piece of foam on, so I'm just putting a strip that looks more like a decorative strip to cover the joints, and then just trim that to size. Cutting the detail line down the grip now. The reason I didn't keep the grip on the main body of the gun is it make it harder to cover up the bottom part with the 2mm foam. So I found it easier to cut that off, cover it, and then glue it on later. This is the top of the gun now. That slide in the top there is where the bolt slides back and forth, or it would in a real gun. Started off gluing the edges of that first to get that lined up, and then stuck the rest of the foam down after. Lots of glue to go on the grip, as this is the part you hold it by. It needs to be nice and secure, and make sure it's nice and straight as well. And this is me trimming down that trigger guard piece that I made too thick. This was made 3 layers thick when it actually only needs to be 2. And to fix the horrible textured side there, I smoothed it off with the rasp file and then just stuck a piece of 2mm thick foam to the back side of it, so it's got 2 smooth sides now. This is that piece that goes between the trigger guard and the main body of the gun, just trimming that to size and then gluing it down. And gluing the trigger guard on. And that's pretty much the main assembly of the gun done. I'm now cutting out the bits that are the trim pieces. There's one on the front, one on the back. And these are going to be cut out of 2 layers thick of the 2mm foam. If you've got 4mm foam, then fantastic, but I don't. So I cut out a rough size of one of those pieces, plenty of glue on it, stuck that down to another bit of foam, made sure that it's well and truly stuck down nice and flat, and then I drew around the piece and cut it out with a very sharp knife. And I did that for all the pieces, made all of the little trim pieces and decorative pieces all at once, and then went on a massive glue-a-thon sticking them all on. So you can see at the top there all of my pieces, and then just used hot glue and stuck them down using the template as a guide. So I've got the template there to get the positioning, glue on the little piece there, move the template away and stick that down. This is part of the trigger guard. Start with one end, get that nice and lined up, make sure that's completely dry before adding glue to the other end and sticking that down too. The trigger was just made out of a piece of foam that I thinned down slightly, probably about 6 to 8mm thick. That's just glued in place. And this is the magazine, which is just a carved out piece of foam as well. Marking where the center of the barrel was going to be, and I cut this out using a sharpened pen lid because this was the right diameter. Could of course use a piece of pipe or something if you got that the right diameter, but this is all I had. I sharpened it first with a bit of sandpaper. I probably went about 2 centimeters deep and then twisted and pulled out the bit from inside with a pair of needle nose pliers, and that left quite a nice clean hole. These little round details I'm adding on now are again with some pen lids of various diameters, just using those and twisting them in almost like drilling into the foam, but only going about 2-3mm deep. I'm now making a stand. This is just a rectangle piece of foam, 3 inches wide, slightly longer than the gun, and then a small rectangular bit just high enough to hold that gun up at the front nice and straight. I cut a notch in the piece at the front there so that the gun will rest inside it, and I put a little tab at the back that will sit underneath the grip just at the back of the magazine. I made a couple of triangle pieces just to help hold that front support up nice and straight. Using a wood burner now to carve in some writing. This is above the selector switch, and then used a heat gun to seal everything now it's all built. This will help give the foam a nice smooth finish and make the paint look better. Speaking of paint, I'm using various browns to help create a wood grain effect, starting off with a light brown and making sure my brush strokes go in all one direction. I cover the foam piece, not too fussed if I get full coverage because the dark grey showing through will give it some texture. Moving on to a slightly darker brown now, some more of a reddy brown, and again I more or less cover the whole thing, but I'm leaving some of that grey and some of that other brown showing through, finishing off with a dark brown, and I use this very sparingly just to add some contrast to those other two colours. The gun was painted with matte black spray paint. This is automotive paint, a couple of coats of that, And then I use some silver acrylic paint. This is high viscosity, very thick paint, and I just use that very sparingly and dry brush some of those edges and add some weathering to the gun where I'd think that it'd be knocked about during use, you know, fighting vampires and things. Last bit of painting to do is a tiny bit of red on the front there that's supposed to be an LED. Lastly, I use some clear automotive lacquer on both the gun and the stand. And here it is all finished. One completed Blades gun, and this has got to be one of the easiest things I've ever made. It's all very boxy and just all straight lines, hardly any complex shapes in this at all. In fact, the hardest part was probably carving out the little safety switch there. That took a few goes, so it probably took about 2 minutes. So yeah, an easy build, very easy build. I even made a little stand for it, as you saw, and so I can display that next to the sword. It goes like that. It does sit flat when it's on a table. Speaking of, I'm going to now show you a load of close-ups of this from various angles that might help you when you come to build your own. So there you go, Blades gun is done. Now if you want to make your own one of these and you're after those templates, you can find those at the Facebook group, the Perfectly Imperfect Makers Community. Just search for that in Facebook, click on join, and I'll accept you into that group. And these can be found in the files section along with some other templates as well, and they're all completely free. So yeah, that's this video done. What I'm going to build for the next one, I'm not sure. But in the meantime, make sure you subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up. Check out the other social media links in the video description, like my Patreon and Instagram. Give those a follow and that too, because that really helps me out. And I'll see you in the next video. And remember, you don't have to be great at making to make something great. Goodbye.